Today, I will be showing you guys how you can make 2D shooting in Unity. I will be showing you how you can create your own shooting system for a 2D game, as well as how to polish it a little bit. Alright, so I have this simple 2D scene with a player object that has a character controller to move around, and I also have this simple environment set up. This is the code for the player controller. If you want a more detailed explanation, then you can check out the video I made on it a couple of months ago, which I'll put in the description or in the top right corner. Now make sure that your weapon sprite is a child of a different object. In my case, I have this rifle object and a sprite object as a child of that. The rifle object will be the object where all of the scripts will be added to. Let's start by having the player's rifle aim at the mouse. To do this, I'll go into my scripts folder and make a new script called player weapon. Let's open up the script and remove system.collections and system.collections.generic because we won't be needing them. I'll also remove the start function. Let's make a new function called aim towards mouse, which will call through the update function. So in the update function, I'll say aim towards mouse. And then I'll create a private void called aim towards mouse. We'll be using the aim towards mouse function to, well, aim towards the mouse. To do this, we must first calculate the angle between our current rotation and the mouse cursor. First, let's make a new local vector2 variable called mouse position, and we will set this to camera.main.screen2world point, and it will take us input.mouse position. This will return the current position of the mouse in world units, allowing us to do some calculation with it. However, right now we are caching the main camera every update, which isn't quite optimized. So instead, let's make a new private camera variable called main camera, and then in the start function, we will assign this to the main camera using main camera equals camera.main. Then, instead of getting the camera every frame, we can just do vector2 mouse position equals main camera.screen2world point, and then as input we will once again use input.mouse position. This is a bit more optimized. Next, let's create a new local vector2 variable called direction. Here, we will calculate the difference between the mouse position and our current position. We will do this using vector2 direction equals new vector2, and then the x value will be mouse position.x minus transform.position.x, and for the y value we'll put in mouse position.y minus transform.position.y. Now let's set our current rotation to this using transform.up equals direction. Now in a 2D game there obviously isn't really a up, however we are using it here because it's the right orientation. Let's now head back into Unity. Make sure that your sprite object's top is also facing upwards, otherwise the rotation won't work. If you now press play, you can see it works correctly. However, when we rotate the mouse to the left side of the screen, it looks a little weird. Let's fix this by flipping the sprite. So let's head back into our script and let's check if the mouse is at the left or right of our player. This is very easy to do by checking if the mouse position.x is less than our current mouse position of the player. And if that's true, then we're gonna say transform the local scale equals new vector3, and we'll take in the value -1, 1 and 1. Else, transform the local scale equals vector3.1, which is basically just a fast way of writing 1, 1, 1. If you now test this out, you can see that the aiming works correctly. So now that we can aim, it's time to start shooting. This is very easy to do. First, let's make a serialized field private game object variable called bullet prefab. This will be the bullet object that we will be shooting. Then let's create a serialized field private transform called firepoint, and finally a serialized field private float called shootforce. The firepoint variable will be the origin of the bullet, and the shootforce variable will be the force with which the bullet is shot. The reason I make these variables private with a serialized field before them is so we can edit them in the inspector without having to make everything public. Now let's go into the update function to check if the player wants to shoot. To do this, we'll go into the update function and check if input.getMousePosition 0, which is the left mouse button, and if so, we're going to call a function called shoot, which doesn't exist yet, but we're going to make it in a little bit. Now this check will allow us to simply hold down the shoot button and keep shooting without having to click multiple times. If you want to have your weapon be semi-automatic, then you need to change this check to if input.getMouseButton down instead of getMouseButton. However, I'm going to use getMouseButton because I want the player to be able to shoot automatically. I'll create a private void shoot. In this function, we will first spawn the bullet object and then shoot it towards the mouse position. To spawn in an object, we will be using the instantiate function. That sounds like a very complicated word, but it basically just means spawning in. So let's use instantiate, and this will take in 3 variables. The first will be the object it will be spawning, which will be the bullet prefab. The second will be the position from which we will spawn it, or at which point. And that will be the firepoint.position, and finally will be the rotation. So we're going to be doing quaternion.identity, which is just a complicated way of saying that it will have no rotation. So now that we have spawned the bullet, it's time to actually make it shoot away. To do this, we will be accessing the rigid body 2D component on the bullet object. And don't worry, I will be showing how to create the bullet object in a bit. To access components of this newly instantiated object, we will need to get a reference to it. That's very easy to do. Let's just create a new local variable and assign the newly instantiated object to that. A local game object variable called bullet object, and then we'll set it equal to the instantiate line from earlier. Now that we have a reference to the bullet, we can access its rigid body to fire it away. This is also very simple to do. Well, we will just go bullet object.getComponent, rigid body 2D, and then we're going to use the function .add force, and we're going to be adding force with transform.up multiplied by shoot force, and then we're going to do it in force mode 2D.impulse. Now let's go back into Unity. First I'll set shoot force to a high number like 50. However, if you want your bullet to go faster or slower, you can adjust this yourself. Then I'll create a new empty game object as a child of the rifle object and call it firepoint. Let's move the firepoint object to the top of the rifle to make sure it fires correctly. Also make sure the green arrow is pointed away from the rifle because that will be the direction we'll be shooting from. Don't forget to add the firepoint object to the firepoint variable. Now the final piece of the puzzle. It's time to create the bullet. Let's make a new empty game object called bullet. If you have a sprite for it, make sure that you add the sprite as a child of the bullet and also make sure that it's completely centered. I'll just be using a regular circle sprite. Let's scale down the sprite to make sure it could actually fit through the gun's barrel, otherwise it would look very weird. Next, let's go to the parent object and add both a circle collider 2D and a rigid body 2D. Resize the circle collider to make it fit and also set gravity scale to 0. If you don't want your circle to be able to rotate, you can freeze rotation on the rigid body. Next, let's go to the top right corner and add a new layer. First I'll create a bullet layer and then I'll create a player layer. Let's add the bullet layer to the bullet and then the player layer to the player. Make sure to also change both objects' children to be on this layer. Now let's go to Edit, Project Settings and then search for Physics 2D. Scroll down until you see this little matrix and uncheck the one where player and bullet match. Just make sure the bullet never collides with the player. You can also uncheck bullet/bullet if you don't want bullets to collide with each other. Now we're nearly done. Let's create a new folder called prefabs and drag and drop your bullet object in there. Then we can remove the original game object. Now let's get back to the rifle object and drag and drop the bullet prefab into the bullet prefab slot. If you now press play, you can see that it all works, but not quite right. First of all, let's go back into the player weapon script and let's make two new variables. The first is going to be a serialized field private float called shoot delay, and the second is going to be a private float called current shoot delay. The shoot delay variable will be the time between shots, and the current shoot delay variable will keep track of how much time has been passed since each shot. Now let's go back into the update function and check if the current shoot delay is less than or equal to 0. Then I'll go to the bottom of the update function and start counting down current shoot delay. And I'll do that by simply doing current shoot delay minus equals time.delta time. Finally, let's go into the shoot function and set the current shoot delay to the shoot delay. That way we won't be able to shoot every frame. If you now go back into Unity and set shoot delay to a small number like 0.2 and then press play, you can see that it works way better. Let's create a new script called bullet. And here we will simply be checking if the bullet has hit something, and if it did hit something we will destroy it and spawn a little particle. So let's remove the two libraries at the top, because we won't be needing them, and create a new variable for the particles, which will be a serialized field private game object called particles. Now let's detect if we have hit something by doing private void onCollision enter 2D. We're just going to be creating a local variable called GameObjectFX, which is set equal to the instantiated particles at position, transient position, so at the current position, and then finally quaternion identity, so once again just no rotation. Now we're going to destroy that FX game object after 3 seconds. And finally we're going to also destroy our game object. This function will automatically check if we hit something, and if we did, we instantiate some particles like we did before, and then we destroy those particles after 3 seconds, and then finally we destroy the current game object. Now let's go back into Unity and create a new particles effect called bullet particles. Now let's make a prefab out of this as well, and then drag and drop that onto the particles variable of the bullet prefab. If you now test this out, you can see that it all works perfectly. And there you go. You have now created a fully functioning 2D shooting system in Unity. The system can be expanded on in a ton of different ways, like adding more weapons, screen shake, and of course some enemies to damage, but I'll leave those up to you. If you are interested in any of those subjects, then you can check out my channel for more tutorials. Now if you found this video helpful, then please consider liking and subscribing, so that really helps me out. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next one.